literally had stories of entrepreneurs saying, I couldn't sleep any longer. I had to stop the business. It was just all too much to bear. So, whilst we think sometimes of happiness and well-being as something nice to have, it's actually quite a fundamental part of being an entrepreneur.
LOWcast. Be informed about the issues that matter. Hello, I'm Clements, Deputy CEO and Director of Campaigns at Low, and welcome to LOWcast. This month, in honour of Low Associates' 15th birthday, we're discussing entrepreneurship. What role do entrepreneurs play in 2024? What are the biggest challenges facing them? Is there a mental health crisis amongst them, as some have claimed? And if so, why and how to tackle it? Or are entrepreneurs in fact the happiest and most resilient people on earth? To discuss these questions, I'm joined by Professor Ute Stephan, Professor of Entrepreneurship at King's College London and a Fellow of the International Association of Applied Psychology and a 21st Century Entrepreneurship Fellow. As an expert on the psychology of entrepreneurship, Ute explores how individuals and societies can thrive through entrepreneurship, and her research builds evidence on how contexts shape entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship in turn can help to build more inclusive societies and be a meaningful career for individual entrepreneurs. Ute's more recent work explores how entrepreneurs can navigate the stresses of entrepreneurship to protect their mental health and grow their personal productivity, creativity and well-being. I should also mention that Ute is an esteemed member of the Sustainable Enterprise Panel, which meets every year at the annual SME Assembly organised by the European Commission and by Low, where they assess the progress that SMEs and European governments are making in the transition towards a more sustainable Europe. So welcome, Ute.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's my pleasure to be here.
And ours. And I'm very pleased also to introduce Low's very own founder and CEO, Sally Low, who set up Low Associates, a strategic communications and policy consultancy 15 years ago this May, after a career spanning law, design, politics and policy. So welcome, Sally.
Thank you very much, Corinne, and it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
So I'm going to start with a very simple question that possibly has all sorts of repercussions and ramifications. But and if I can start with you, Ute, what role do entrepreneurs play in 2024?
I think entrepreneurs play always an important role. They are job creators, innovators, drive productivity, economic impact. But they also are increasingly recognized, if you think of climate change or societal inclusions, as, hotspots and drivers of innovative ideas and hotspots where inclusion can also happen within the own organization. I think what's really critical in 2024 is to recognize that most entrepreneurs have not just been through one crisis, but through a succession of many crises. And it started with COVID, then we had the Ukraine war and kind of cost of living or cost of doing business crisis. And I think we'll get to this later, but even if you're very resilient, shock after shock after shock can just wear you out. So I think 2024 is also a good time to talk about how entrepreneurs can be supported and how their well-being can be supported.
Yes. Sally, would you agree with that? Is there anything else that you feel specific to this time?
Yes, Karen, I think, it's so interesting. When I look back, we've got our 15th anniversary. So we set up in 2009, 2008, we had the crash, and that started to, and that really shaped an awful lot of how the decisions that I made in terms of what sort of business we were and we were going to become. And it's just been, I do say it's a roller coaster ride, tracking through all the other things with COVID and for us as well, Brexit was a huge political change, which prompted massive shifts in the way we ran the business again. So I think having to keep changing all the time. Coming through to 2024, I'm much more conscious now of the shift in people and how we work and run the businesses according to the people that we employ, the clients that we work with. There's a fundamental shift in people's outlook and what they want from their jobs and their roles. Totally different from when we started back in even 15 years ago. So I think that for me is the interesting one, and what I'm always interested in is how we can adapt and maintain all the great stuff that we do and the professionalism and the client service, but embrace the changes that are going on amongst the people around us as well, which is going to have a massive effect on our future work.
Thanks, Sally. You mentioned, both of you referred to the various crises, and I suppose that the financial crisis was very critical for you, Sally, in that it, as you say, it determined what type of business that you would do that would be sustainable and that would be able to flourish. But also, obviously, the pandemic had an extraordinary impact on entrepreneurs, not least because in some instances they became the absolute bedrocks of societies in a way that people didn't recognise them as being so prior to that, which was presumably a positive. But Ute, you're conducting a study at the moment on the impacts of COVID, and I think it covers 31 countries across the world. Have you found that the impact of the pandemic on entrepreneurs, on their well-being, has been consistent across the world? And what was this immeasurable impact?
Yes, so we surveyed over 5,000 entrepreneurs, and independent of country, we saw kind of a lot of entrepreneurs really worrying about their business, about whether they can make it literally to the next month, sometimes even the next week. And just to give you a number, over 62% really felt that the survival of their business was threatened. So the majority really. At the same time, we also saw entrepreneurs really pivoting, finding new opportunities for their business, kind of really using the crisis as an opportunity, as the saying goes. So it was really both stories. And what we saw was if they managed to see new opportunities in the crisis, new business opportunities, then actually that helped sustain their own well-being, because it kind of helped reestablish a sense of control. So you're typically in charge as an entrepreneur, and what the crisis does is it has, a huge impact on how certain you feel about what you're doing. And uncertainty is stressful for everyone, but entrepreneurs have to bear much higher levels of it. And what also came through was that entrepreneurs who had employees, there was a really additional burden on their well-being. And it wasn't just that they were worried about the jobs of their employees. It even went further than that, because often in smaller businesses, you know the employees, but you also know the employees' families. And so suddenly the burden becomes not just your own family, because that's also tied to the business, but also the employees and their families who rest on your shoulders. And we literally had stories of entrepreneurs saying, I couldn't sleep any longer. I had to stop the business. It was just all too much to bear. So, whilst we think sometimes of happiness and well-being as something nice to have, is actually quite a fundamental part of being an entrepreneur. And when you're extremely stressed, then, the business stops, because the business stops with the entrepreneur. Maybe one more thing, what we also saw, interestingly, was despite entrepreneurs' businesses threatened to such a great extent, remember over 60% said they don't think their business is going to survive this, they were still privately and through their business engaging in charitable activities, kind of trying to support, do good things for their community in the UK, kind of try and help support the NHS efforts. So it was really striking that, whilst we sometimes had this image of entrepreneurs as, looking primarily after their own well-being, they were also worried not just about their employees and their families, but also wider, were actively contributing to a wider society.
Yes, and I think that it's very important to establish the difference between the entrepreneur and the manager, because you are identifying 100% with your business. So when things are bad, it's a threat to who you are. But conversely, when things are good, then it's the most fantastic. Philip, I think Ute, I'm sure I read somewhere or I've heard you say before that there's a study that shows that entrepreneurs recognise that part of their brain lights up in the same way when they see pictures of the logo of their business and of their children, which I loved. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So it is literally the love for what you have made, what you have brought to life.
Yeah, so it's a study by Finnish colleagues, and they put entrepreneurs, in this instance only men entrepreneurs, into scanners and showed them, it's an experiment, so all sorts of things controlled for, and showed them pictures of their own children, and the reaction they got was literally in the brain was the same as the reaction to the business in terms of commitment, love. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and I think we often think, there is the financial aspect when things don't go well, but as you say, it's kind of much more. If you are the business and the business is you, then it feels like, actually your whole identity is at stake, and it's not just about the money. And that's also why we consistently see across different studies that any type of shock is always affecting entrepreneurs much more strongly than employees.
And that is, that's a huge difference, and these shocks have come again and again and again. So has there been any recognition in a governmental kind of way of the need for more support for entrepreneurs and smaller companies? Has there been any shift in policy as a result? Or has there just been maybe a greater awareness of their being just as at risk, or being possibly more at risk as other workers?
I would say overall, not yet. So I think the well-being or stress conversation is a tricky one for multiple reasons. One reason being that entrepreneurs are actually being socialized by the ecosystem around them to be tough going, right? To recognize that they need to work long hours and then success will come. And, if you just imagine a emerging founder pitching to a VC, they're not going to talk about their well-being. They're going to project an image of being hardy, resilient, and being able to succeed against all odds. And that's actually part of the reason why I'm working with the Founder Mental Health Pledge out of the US, which really tries to just say, look, there is a mental health side to all of this, and if you are honest as a funder about investing in the entrepreneur and the ideas, then you're not just investing in the business, is what everybody says. Well, the entrepreneur, him or herself, is an essential part of the business, so it should be a legitimate business expense to, for the entrepreneur to look after their own well-being and mental health. And I think this mindset would be a first step. And then I guess on a very broad policy level, of course, this also aligns with efforts, for instance, by the OECD or the EU, kind of to think beyond GDP as a measure of economic output. So there is a movement to install some measure of well-being alongside economic value creation.
It's totally understandable, isn't it? I mean, we have had a complete shift in how we deal with mental health, how we talk about it, certainly in Western Europe. But it still is more acceptable for an employee to go to their manager or their boss and say, I'm feeling depressed, than it is for, as you say, for an entrepreneur to discuss their mental health with anyone. What I'm trying to get at is that it's not just a position of authority, it's that, as we discussed earlier, it's that the identification with the business as being yourself, which puts that extra pressure on, I think. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, and I remember interminable discussions when I was growing up around the supper table when my father just needed to offload. He needed to explain all the ins and outs of the conversations he'd been having in the day, and I realised now that was part of his way of dealing with just the stresses and things that cropped up. And I when I set up the business. What I had never anticipated was the personal nature of it and the emotional nature of it, and the sort of, sometimes when you're feeling at least having to do showtime and exude this self-confidence, and so you get used to doing that and putting on a front, and obviously and I also think it's very, very important if you are leading a company and with people, they don't want to see a chink in the armour, if you like. They don't need that. They need to be reassured and confident. Do feel very proud and do say from time to time it feels like it's my name over the door, which makes it added pressure as well, I suppose. But it's such a wonderful moment when it goes well, and great fun, and you sort of have to kind of hold on to those moments when sometimes it's not always quite as much fun. And things seem to piling up. But as my father said, it's one step forward, two steps back, he used to say, and occasionally those words ring in my ears, definitely.
I think because we haven't paid much attention to entrepreneurs' well-being, stress, mental health, we actually don't understand that well how to support them. Having said that, so together with Jeff Gish and Amanda Williamson, we kind of took stock of what we know in well-being science overall and what applies from that, what could apply to entrepreneurs. And so one thing that comes through is that because there is this constant load, as Sally described, for instance, if you need to this kind of emotional labor, if you need to project always a good image and need to infuse enthusiasm when you may not feel like it. And so because of this constant high load of stress, it's important to kind of take steps to recover from that stress. So our body can deal with stress, right? The problem is over long time, sustained stress takes a toll on your body, and a toll that entrepreneurs don't necessarily are that aware of because they're in the doing mode, right, all the time. And so obviously you can't say have less stress, but what you can say is be mindful that you need recovery periods. And recovery can be kind of small things, and actually small things every day make much more of a difference than kind of trying to take, let's say, a huge long holiday.
I wanted to talk just briefly about the support that you've just specific mechanisms that you've talked about, but if there's a more general approach that government that can be translated into policy. Ute, you've spoken about having different indicators for a country, well-being being one just as much as GDP, for example. There's a special project called Early Warning, which is run by the European Commission. This is specifically designed to help entrepreneurs who feel their business is getting into financial difficulties. And actually what most of those that are involved in the project and that are actually working on a day-to-day basis, they're ambassadors, people who do this completely free of their, give their own time, find is that it's the talking, it's the offloading that stops it all from becoming too disastrous, and that they've been able to step in so many times before the worst happens. The worst in some instances being, entrepreneurs taking their own lives. So these are really practical, great projects that, are these happening throughout the world, or are we just very privileged in the European Union?
So I know that New Zealand, there's some efforts underway, but I really like what you described, because I think that's a way forward. I also think, but overall there's very little. But I also consider that governments actually pay a lot of, or invest in a lot of early stage entrepreneurs directly or typically indirectly through Business Bank or KfW in Germany. So what if all these public funders could have a little signal in their funding package? Look after your own mental health. We know this is a stressful situation, and maybe here is a toolkit, or better yet, talk to an experienced entrepreneur how they have handled things. I think that would be tremendous. And we actually do see this kind of more, if you want, bottom up. So there are VCs that have in their term sheets, it's a legitimate business expense to invest in your own well-being, mental health. This is really very early stage. Or in the UK, Balderton, the VC, they actually have a wellness program that comes alongside the investment. And I think that's really great in terms of early intervention, because this is when it all starts. And also, if you get investment, this is typically a period when roles can change and demands can change. So if you then have somebody by your side, or a mechanism that kind of helps you to adapt to these changes, I think that would be great. Yeah, so I think a lot more to do, some signs that we're getting there, that we're having at least a mind that this is important, which I think is a big milestone already.
Yes, so baby steps, but progress is being made. And conversely, we talked earlier about, when the going's bad, then you feel like your being is threatened, but the opposite also applies. So I think that your research also shows that entrepreneurs are happier than most people. Is that right?
Indeed, we're talking so much about the crisis and the stress. On balance, and this is a study of studies, so we aggregated 40 years of research across 82 countries, and the takeaway is being an entrepreneur makes you happy. And then it depends. It's a happier career choice in countries like we live in, where there is a strong rule of law, functioning democracies. It's much harder, as you said earlier, if everything around you is extra uncertain, because the rule of law doesn't work. So if somebody doesn't pay you for services provided, you can't just go to court, or maybe you can go to court, but by the time you get your day in court, probably your business is bankrupt anyway. So I think it can be really a fulfilling career, but I think we still underestimate that there is work required to make it a fulfilling career, to be mindful how you organize your work. Because I think there's something I like to call the well-being paradox of entrepreneurs. So you have individuals who are very achievement-oriented. We know that entrepreneurs tend to set themselves high goals. That's why that's what motivates them. That's why they get things done. And then they have work that has no boundaries. But you can always acquire a new contract. You can always get more customers. You can always grow across borders into a new country. And so this combination, and then it's very meaningful work because it's part of who you are, as we talked about earlier, the identity. So it's really difficult to stop that, because you do feel, you enjoy what you're doing, it's fulfilling, it's meaningful. But you do need to listen to your body and kind of set these breaks and be mindful that even you as an entrepreneur, even especially, I guess, the young ones, we see a lot of burnout there. After they've been very successful, gotten high growth, huge amounts of investments, and then it suddenly all stops because they feel they can't do it any longer. And so obviously we don't want to get there, right? We want to be sure that we harness the potential of all entrepreneurs. And so one of the great things about entrepreneurship is that different individuals can thrive in it, but we do need to be mindful that it is still a tough job.
Well, in talking of the future, and this is going to be my last question to you both, but we've talked about the different characteristics of the entrepreneur: proactive, committed, taking calculated risks, creative. These are all fantastic traits for navigating the future. Ute, in terms of our greatest challenge, which arguably is climate change, do you think that entrepreneurs hold the solution?
I think, it's a challenge too big for just one group to address it. I do think entrepreneurs play an important role. And we actually see that it can be rewarding also in a business sense, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises that typically entrepreneur-led and that also dominate the EU and UK economies. We see if they start, so it's baby steps again, I guess, if they start with projects that also their customers care about. So it's often more demand driven by customers actually thinking, I'd rather have a business that either is climate neutral or kind of that helps at least some way to address this, or does a little bit. And so through that, we see then if they invest in kind of eco-innovations, it was in our study, and actually they get also greater returns from doing that. So it pays off. It pays off for the bottom line. So I think that's important, not to see it just as a chore and something we ought to engage in, but also as something that can really positively contribute. And so the plea is basically to start with something that fits your business model, that isn't kind of an add-on, but that kind of makes sense. And I guess it goes back to Sally's point, entrepreneurs tend to be proactive, trying to look for opportunities. And so they may see a lot more opportunities than you would see from, a kind of government perspective. There are other roles that government need to play in this transition, but I think we really need everybody to kind of start thinking about this. And the world is changing. Customers are ever more asking for commitment on this front, on being climate neutral, or maybe even having a positive impact on kind of pro-environmental initiatives.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, and would add as well as customers demanding it in varying degrees. It's also a key driver for attracting great people and great staff. The sort of generation that we're recruiting now are passionate about the climate. It's important to them, and so for us, it's been about a sort of and also, driven by a desire to affect change personally, and Corin is a passionate advocate of this too. But it's been about instilling behaviour change and just scrutinising very carefully what we do, mindful of the fact that we are a small business. We're in the service business, and so there's a kind of a limit. We're not in heavy industry or something, but also to have an idea about who we buy from, who we work for, how we travel, all of that stuff, and just instilling that kind of question in our minds before a commitment is made. And we've even all made sort of demonstrable kind of public pledges. I've made the dreaded pledge not to buy any new clothes and things like that, which is kind of been a tough one, and just trying to demonstrate by example really that we care about this. It's not just a kind of just a hollow promise or a greenwash thing, and doing it properly, I think, which is very important in terms of the events that we run and the projects that we cover.
Absolutely. I'm afraid we've run out of time, so I wish we could have carried on talking. There's so much more to cover, but maybe we can do it another time. I'd just like to therefore say a massive thank you to Professor Ute Stephan for joining us today. It's been a joy to talk to you, and obviously to Sally for joining us as well. So thank you both greatly for this conversation. And I believe that if you wanted to find out more about Professor Stephan's work, we'll put a link on with this podcast to her website so that you can go and find out more. And indeed, anything more you want to know about Low, you can also find us at www.loweurope.eu. Okay, thank you so much.